I am reasonably convinced that no game launch in the remainder of my lifetime will be as memorable as Half-Life 2's. Teenage me was so hyped, I did something I've never done since. I forked out money for that big silver collector's edition box, in the days when collector's editions gave you something other than just in-game microcurrency. The hype level was literally over 9,000, and it felt like whatever corner of the gaming world you hung out in back on that young internet in the early 2000s, you would be involved in some way with the hype surrounding Half-Life 2. I've got a lot of nostalgia for that time and that era of gaming. If Half-Life 1 redefined what a first-person shooter could be, then Half-Life 2 had to prove that Valve could continue innovating and that their previous success was no fluke. Making a sequel to a successful game is already risky enough, but Valve would go far beyond that. They would aim to succeed in entirely revolutionizing the distribution of games and the entire industry in the process, using Half-Life 2 as the vehicle. This path would not be without challenges along the way and massive risk. Valve would take a risk in launching Half-Life 2 requiring Steam. It would challenge Vivendi, its former publisher, over the use of Counter-Strike in LAN cafes, and fighting a brutal legal battle that threatened to destroy the studio and the personal lives of those who ran it. And just as the game was nearing release, a massive test build of the game would leak, causing them to ask whether the project was even worth finishing. But finish it they did. At the start of Half-Life 2's development, Valve found themselves in a very different place than we saw them with Half-Life 1. Where before they were a small startup with access to only a few young enthusiasts in the game industry, they now sat atop the FPS genre as its acclaimed pioneers. The general attitude amongst the team was that with their current knowledge base, they could quickly capitalize on their previous success, and within a few years, release a game that could be just as revolutionary as Half-Life 2. Gabe Newell, on the other hand, was more circumspect about getting a new revolutionary game out so soon. And it turned out he would be right. Half-Life 2 would release after 6 years of intensive development, and after several internal dramas including that massive leak of the beta content as well as the lawsuit by Vivendi over the rights to the franchise. And while Valve were facing these new challenges brought about in part by their newfound fame, they also realized that this fame had some advantages. First of all, after the success of Half-Life 1, they now had access to the best talent in gaming. Everyone who was anyone wanted to work at Valve, and the influx of new talent is evident in the quality of the game. Perhaps the most notable of the new talents would be Viktor Antonov, who would be responsible for Half-Life 2's lauded art direction and Eastern European flair, and who would later go on to design the Dishonored series. Initially, the team at Valve were going to place Half-Life 2 in several locations across the globe, but under Antonov's direction, they came up with the idea of placing it, quote, somewhere in Eastern Europe in a place that looks as if it's been invaded by both the Russians and the Ottomans. This was undoubtedly a stroke of genius and introduced, I suspect, a lot of the world to how charming the atmosphere in the Balkans is. Seriously, go there. The place is beautiful and it's pretty cheap. Along with Antonov, the team at Valve, now with an influx of new engineers, began completely rewriting the game's engine from scratch. As we discussed in my previous video, the original Half-Life had been built on a modified version of the Quake engine. Now Valve wanted to construct their own game engine entirely from scratch, and work on the source engine would begin almost immediately. The source engine would have a number of improvements over its Quake-based predecessor, but perhaps most notable of these would be massive upgrades in the areas of physics and lighting, to the extent that many, including myself, when we first saw the game, thought that this must be some sort of deception or scam. Remember, this was long before the times when AAA companies would show footage of games running with impossible graphics and then scale them down at launch, so people genuinely expected Half-Life's graphics to be as good as they appeared when advertised. The lighting for the new source engine was a massive improvement upon what any gaming engine in the early 2000s could provide. So much so that Valve's engineers actually needed to contact the manufacturers of 3D accelerator cards to get them to change the mathematics involved in the way their chips rendered lighting to do it the Valve way. The lighting in the source engine would be shown off in a demo called the Gold Coast, which still looks pretty good to this day. As of writing this script, Half-Life 2 RTX has recently been released, and it's shocking to me how much I actually prefer the original lighting in Half-Life 2. The lighting design is such an artistic achievement that it stands the test of time even against modern inventions like RTX. There's something so soothing about the way the world looks in the source engine that it's become one of my favorite features during replaying the game. The physics engine was also greatly improved. While the gold source engine of Half-Life 1 had broadly the same physics as the Quake series, Half-Life 2's physics engine would be completely revolutionary both in terms of its visual aspect as well as its gameplay implications. All movable objects in Half-Life 2 would have actual mass and interactive gravity, and all the other science things one would expect from things that have gravity. This led the game to look much better than its contemporaries when it came to things like destructible objects or just generally blowing stuff up. But it also opened up a variety of new gameplay options that Valve's level designers were all too happy to explore. As the team of engineers devoted substantial time to developing Hammer, the engine's new level editor, the level designers at Valve, as a result, would have access to almost unparalleled freedom to develop as they wished, without the need to ask the studio's engineers for help on more complex tasks. The level designers at Valve stuck with their core philosophy of making fun things, and many of the fun things in Half-Life 2 involve the physics engine. Valve's newfound fame also allowed them to hire, in my opinion, one of the most underrated geniuses in the history of game development, in Tom Leonard. Leonard was the lead designer over at Looking Glass Studios on the Thief series. At this point in time, he was without a doubt the single most knowledgeable developer in the world about how to craft believable enemy AI. The AI in Half-Life 2 is still one of the better AIs in gaming, in my opinion, which shows both how good Half-Life 2's AI is, but also how little innovation has come about in the industry since its release. The enemies in Half-Life 2 employ tactics against the player. Zombies throw objects at you and attempt to surround you. The Combine hold back, wait, and encircle you. Citizens fight alongside Freeman as they stand confused and block you at every turn, run into the street, and then die shooting randomly up in the air. So it's not all perfect, but it's an improvement. But by far the most controversial turn that Half-Life 2's development would take would be that the game would require the installation of Valve's new software distribution platform, Steam, in order to play. If you're watching this video and you're in your 20s and can't remember any of this, you might think it's just kind of obvious that the internet would evolve towards software distribution through downloads, but it definitely didn't feel that way back in 2003. The internet was much less reliable than it is now, and much slower. People enjoyed their box copies of games and collecting them. And the idea of installing a launcher in order to play a game, well, okay, that's actually still really annoying sometimes in 2025. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Valve took a massive risk, a risk none of us in the Half-Life community at the time were particularly happy about. I can remember the slogan amongst us fans being, Steam? Steam is a pile of crap. But Gabe Duell turned out to be right about the direction the internet was going, which is why he's now worth $9.5 billion according to Forbes. Safe to say that the success of Steam hinged entirely upon the launch of Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2, along with its source engine companions, Counter-Strike and Team Fortress 2, would be among the most desirable games to play of the mid-2000s. And to play them, you would have to download Steam. Valve's near monopoly over the digital distribution of games would be founded upon the quality of their own products. But make no mistake, this was a risky strategy that could have led people to entirely rejecting Valve's way of doing things had the games themselves not had enough hype behind them. And as a result, consumers would have entirely ignored the Steam platform. But speaking of hype, it's probably best for me to stop hyping Half-Life 2 and get into our retrospective properly, as Gordon Freeman returns to consciousness once again on a train. And the G-Man, well, I'll let him explain.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until, well, Let's just say your hour has come again. The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world. So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ash.
Gordon awakes on a very different train than we saw him at the end of Half-Life 1. We can gather from the man on the train with us that we're being transferred to a new city, but by what, where, or who is unclear. Stepping off the train, Valve throw the player literally every clue in the book that they're now living in a dystopian society controlled by some form of tyrannical government. Unlike the intro to Half-Life 1, we get to walk around semi-freely through most of Half-Life 2's intro and immerse ourselves in the area. As Gordon makes his way through the city, hovering robots photograph people, and on a giant monitor overlooking the station, a man is speaking who will later be revealed to be Wallace Breen, our former boss back at Black Mesa. He welcomes us to City 17, referring to it rather chillingly as one of our finest remaining urban centers, which is such a great line to open the game with, really driving home to the player how much the world has changed since the first game. Eventually, while passing through a checkpoint, we're pulled aside by a metro cop and taken into an interrogation room. To literally everyone's surprise upon playing this for the first time, this turns out to be Barney from Half-Life Blue Shift, that guy who we saw banging on a locked door at the intro in Half-Life 1. This is such a surprise largely because it's Barney. Let's be honest, how is Barney of all people an undercover cop? But I'll let Gabe and the guys at Valve be themselves on this one. We're also introduced to Dr. Kleiner over the screen. They're surprised to find Gordon suddenly appear in the city, but it's always left a bit unclear where they think he was the whole time that he was in stasis, and of course, silent old Gordon can't tell them. The designers at Valve said that they felt that if Gordon encountered the same people he had in Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, that the events at Black Mesa would serve to connect the two games. But at times, at least for me, this connection can seem a little bit tenuous. People often talk about how Gordon is a silent protagonist, but one of the most interesting things about this is that he is clearly unable or unwilling to explain the whole G-Man stuff that happened to him during the events of Half-Life 1 to anybody that he meets in Half-Life 2. But there's another aspect in which this works really well. We have literally been in stasis since defeating the Nilanth at the end of Half-Life 1, and as a result, the player and Gordon Freeman are both confused about the current state of this new world they've emerged into. And this does a good job of turning him into a stand-in for us as we begin to explore City 17. Barney's supervisors are about to check in on him, and we're told to leave through a nearby window. This introduces the player to the game's physics system. You can move the crates to jump through the window. Though it seems the team's designers were not sure this was enough to inform the player about just how much they could interact with every detail of the world around them. As a result, as we progress through the back alleys of the station towards the front, we're confronted by an ornery guard who throws a can of soda on the floor and demeaningly tells us to pick it up. We can pick it up in order to pass by him, and if we're really nice, we can even put it into the garbage. This little piece of gameplay jives home to the player just how interactable the world is, and also gives you an achievement in 2025 for not littering if you care about that kind of thing. This opening scene is also set in one of the best areas you could ever begin a story in Eastern Europe, a rail station. If you're from North America or you've never been to Eastern Europe, their train stations are just different. They're more like cultural communal hubs for the city or the town, and less like just areas for transportation like you might find in Western Europe or America. Seeing this Eastern European rail station suddenly turn into an empty dystopian people processing nightmare really does a great job at setting the tone, and in my opinion is yet another great example of Antonov's visual storytelling. As we exit out the doors of the station, we're greeted by a wide open plaza and the skyline of City 17's surrounding buildings. Breen is once again on the screen above us in the plaza, addressing the concerns of the citizens about the Combine's control over the planet and the quote-unquote suppression field, which we will find out later is, among other things, removing humans' ability to reproduce. There's a lovely ambience to this opening scene as we wander through the streets. It's not quite clear who the Combine are yet, and they're not yet aware of Gordon as we make our way through the streets and aware of the fact that Gordon seems to have escaped being processed. You're treated more or less like any other civilian, which is to say not very well, but we're not yet pursued. Antonov mentioned in interviews that he wanted to explore the back alleys of the city rather than the storefronts and facades, and that's what we do in the opening of this level as we make our way through the back alleys and into the apartment complexes. We suddenly see the Combine going door to door, and at this moment everything changes. We're pulled into one of the rooms by a concerned citizen who recognizes that we're the one being pursued by the Metro cops, and the chase begins in earnest as we run from the raid on the apartment in search of Gordon and leap through the attic from roof to roof. Eventually, we're cornered and knocked out, only to be defended by Alex, the new character. It turns out after the Combine are defeated that we're actually conveniently close to Dr. Kleiner's lab, which is located neatly behind a nearby vending machine that Alex opens for us. After being introduced to everyone and getting a chance to catch our breath, Kleiner tells Barry that they're going to test the new teleporter on us and Alex. These talking sections are notably awkward for Gordon, where you stand there speechless and then get mocked by Barney for not helping out much. Though at the time of the game's launch, the facial modeling was really something, and it did a lot to further the immersive aspects that Valve had always wanted to add to the Half-Life franchise. After being introduced to the troublesome Lamar, Kleiner's pet headcrab, we're given our good old reliable HEV suit, which for me has always raised some questions. We were told at the end of Half-Life 1 that the G-Man would leave us with our HEV suit even though he took away all our weapons, but it seems in the end things got a bit spicy and the G-Man ended up undressing us, but I'm not going to think about that too much. Alex goes through the teleporter to meet her father on the other side. Her dad is Eli Vance, the super memorable guy who sent us up to the top at the beginning of Half-Life 1. You remember him, right? I covered him in the first retrospective. I'm sure of it. Because he was so important to the narrative. But anyways, let's be honest. Sometimes Valve's attempt to tie these two together can be a bit thin, but I'll take it. It's still a lot better than half the games made today. When it comes time for Gordon to head through the portal, Lamar does what headcrabs do and breaks the teleporter, which teleports us simply to the other side of the wall outside the building, which is narratively effective but extremely inconvenient for practical purposes. The moments that we spend within the teleporter, though, give us a glimpse into events elsewhere, with us seeing a Wallace brain confused as to how we got into his office, amongst some other things. Finding ourselves on the other side of the wall leaves Gordon now in a perilous situation as we're still being pursued by the Combine, and now we need to make our way to Eli Vance's lab at Black Mesa East on our own. Barry chucks us down the old reliable crowbar and we're off. This first section sees us leaping through and over a series of rail cars as an oncoming train arrives, with the music blaring, and as we rush to cross the train tracks, this moment really hits hard and tells you that the game is finally getting going. And so we begin the first real level, the punnily titled Root Canal. This level lives up to its punny name. It involves finding a route through the canal system of City 17, whilst being pursued by the Combine at literally every turn. This level can make the enemy AI, in fact, look a little bit more sophisticated than they actually are. Valve clearly realized during development that certain events were just better off pre-scripted than left up to the AI itself. So while it does feel like you're being pursued, this is still largely the same trick we encountered in Half-Life 1, of having a new scripted event occur every time the player takes a step forward. Albeit now we have dynamic physics and bigger explosions and corpses flying all over the place. We're also introduced to a new mechanic the developers really love. The barnacle from Half-Life 1 has now made its home in every dark corner of City 17, but we've got a new mechanic to deal with it. If we take a normal barrel, we can feed it to them and gum up the works, allowing us to sneak past. But better yet, we can take an explosive barrel, set it alight, and feed it to them for predictably gooey results. This level also introduces the game's most common enemy, the Metro Cop, which is in essence the continuation of the Marine from Half-Life 1. They're smarter, but follow similar tactics. There are limitations placed on them due to how accurate their weapons are. Only 2 of them can fire at the player at once, so they tend to try to spread out and flank you, which actually makes them more difficult in combat situations because they're less predictable. They come in 3 major types, and they've got a variety of weapons, but the ones we've been introduced to so far only have machine guns and pistols. Eventually, we'll see ones who have assault rifles and shotguns. Also, what would this level be without the manhack? There was something about the manhack that just really had me hyped for Half-Life 2. It's no secret that since the hideous failure of John Romero's Daikatana, that flying enemies in games can be a little bit of an issue. But the manhack is cleverly designed enough and introduced in the right areas that make it not so bad. Instead of using their aerial status as an advantage, they tend to act more like fun baseballs in a minigame where you can take your crowbar and smack them back and forth at each other. They also do a great job of adding to the general vibe of the level. As Freeman is being pursued by the Combine, they can follow you into areas where it would make no sense for the Combine soldiers to suddenly appear. In fact, Valve do a really good job throughout the entirety of this level of finding a rational reason for there to be enemies where you're going. Also, just a note, I'm going to call them soldiers rather than Metro Cops a lot throughout this retrospective because calling them cops is just intentionally confusing Orwellian speak. I know an invading alien army when I see one, and those guys are an invading alien army. The music by Kelly Bailey, who also did the music in Half-Life 1, is excellent throughout. I realized I forgot to mention in my Half-Life 1 retrospective just how impressive it is that a guy with a pretty basic background in music composition did so insanely well in Half-Life 1, and damn, he's back and swinging hard in Half-Life 2. The futuristic drum-heavy tracks really keep the pacing going throughout the game. And here they cue in at just the right moments when Gordon really needs to hightail it out of an area as fast as possible, and they lend to that sense of panicked urgency that you really want in a level like this. After rooting our way through the canals, we eventually come to a section that foreshadows the end of the level and something entirely new. We need to fight our way out through a mass of zombies and headcrabs through this toxic waste yard. It's nasty. Also, we can see at this point that the Combine like dropping missiles full of headcrabs on enemy positions, which as far as I can tell is the weirdest way to break the Geneva Convention, and clearly an excuse by Valve to stick these annoying crabs all over the place. I mean, headcrabs are just going to turn these people into zombies, which is going to make it more difficult for the Combine soldiers to eventually secure the location. We can see them run into this problem over and over, of Combine soldiers being eaten by zombies, and yet they persist. But hey, I guess we do that in real life with landmines all the time. Anyways, another thing worth commenting on here is the general atmosphere of the level. While it has its darker moments, the overall atmosphere is more that of a sci-fi dystopian action film rather than a horror classic. Half-Life 1 was, at least in this man's humble opinion, a horror game at its core. The feeling of being trapped alone, surrounded by terrifying alien monsters in a lab accident gone wrong is classic horror, and my opinion is backed up by Valve's developers' own comments that they mention in the 20th anniversary documentary. They comment on the fact that Half-Life 2 has a much lighter tone to it than Half-Life 1, and that they might, at a certain point in this game, want to bring back the darkness. And they will do that later, but the reality is that this is a much lighter game, both in tone, but also literal lighting, in the sense that the lighting effects are amazing, and they're frequently used to brighten areas. But it's also true that this game has a much lighter tone to it, even in its darkest moments, than the original Half-Life. Except for that one bit that we're going to get there. This is a sci-fi dystopia set in Eastern Europe rather than a horror game, until we go to that place we shouldn't go. Arriving at the next resistance camp, we're told over the radio by Alex to give us a watercraft to head towards Black Mesa East, and off we go into the game's next level. Waterhazard. I mentioned in my retrospective of Half-Life 1 that you could really tell that Valve wanted to add more vehicles into that game and didn't have the technology available at the time to do it. Well, they do now. And Half-Life 2 will feature 2 levels that are almost entirely vehicle-based. Fans of the game differ in their opinion on them, but for my money, I love them, and I think they're some of the best vehicle levels ever made in a video game. Definitely better than that one in Mass Effect. Are the controls realistic? No. The game puts in a lot of effort to save you from making game-breaking mistakes, particularly on this level. The boat tends to steer a bit clunky, and I feel they've added some physics parameters to the box around it to stop me flipping it over and around every which way. The level is divided into 2 sections. The first sees us navigate some simple obstacles, including several physics puzzles. The first of which involves taking several buoyant barrels and using them to raise a platform so we can launch our swamp boat over to the other side. Coming to the next area, we're introduced to the choppers that will hunt us for the remainder of the section. Eventually, we're confronted by a large gate covering the waterway. We've got to go back out and go inside the industrial complex nearby. This leads to a fight against the Combine on both the way in, which is a relatively small battle, and a huge one on the way out. The dynamic enemy placement to this section really struck me, and it's a great example of the way Valve script these levels to feel more engaging. When you first go into the complex, the Combine soldiers are surprised to see you, and you can often get the jump on them. Whereas, once you open the game and reinforcements are called in, which I know is just a trigger that spawns in as you try and exit the level, but heck, it feels great. You can even hear the calls for help sound out over the radio and the sound of the choppers flying in. Just as the action is slowed down as you get back to the boat, things then really begin to escalate through the next section, which plays out something more like a James Bond cinematic chase than what an audience in 2004 probably expected going into a Half-Life game. The gameplay cycle then repeats here with another small section where we need to leave the boat, fight our way forward to open a gate, and then set out on yet another epic cinematic chase. The choppers are now dropping mines in front of us this time, and they do a hefty amount of damage. They explode if we hit them, or go off on a timer if we don't. It adds a bit more of a dynamic choice, let's say, about how we go forward. And by escaping this section, we'll now reach the midpoint of the level. We pull into a resistance station to be warmly greeted by its members, including a Vortigaunt. Did I mention that Vortigaunts are on our side now? And they are absolutely effing adorable. Just look at the big face with its big red bulbous eye looking at you. And Mr. Vortigaunt is going to help Freeman by wielding the Tau Cannon, remember that from the final levels of Half-Life 1, onto the front of our swamp boat, giving us some heavy firepower in what's to come. The next half of the level is more or less the same, only this time we're fighting back. The level ends in an epic battle against that same mine-dropping chopper, which after being pursued through the air the entire level feels really good when we finally get to blast it out of the sky with the Tau Cannon. Eventually we make our way through the sluices and water gates, and we finally arrive at the dam at Black Mesa East. This level serves as a little narrative interlude and tutorial after the last 2 high-octane levels. The complex is an old Soviet-style lab of some kind. Presumably Black Mesa East means Black Mesa, Eastern Europe, though I can't find if this is confirmed in the game's lore or just, obviously implied by the fact that we're in Eastern Europe and not New Mexico. After a quick scan into the complex, we're introduced again to Eli Vance, his assistant Dr. Mossman, and reunited with Alex. They want Gordon to take off the hazard suit and get back to work on the transportation technology they've been developing for the fight against the Combine, but we all know Gordon ain't taking off the suit. I love this section for the foreboding feeling it gives you because we all know there is zero chance that Gordon Freeman is going to settle down and spend the next few years working with Judith and Eli. There's a little nice comment here that tells us all we need to know about the new character of Judith as well. She was the next in line for Gordon's job at Black Mesa and would have been the one in the room during the resonance cascade, but we edged her out due to our Innsbruck experience, which I assume is a reference to the fact that Gordon Freeman would have worked on the Large Hadron Collider. Tells us all we need to know. She's jealous of the role Gordon Freeman played in the events of the original game, and she doesn't get along too well with Alex either. Eventually, we're taken out back and introduced to the most beloved feature of Half-Life 2 by many, the gravity gun. We get to go out back into the scrapyard and play fetch with Dog, Alex's pet giant robot, who manages to be very, what I'll call Pixar cute. To literally no one's surprise, we suddenly need to flee the facility because the Combine are doing a suspiciously well-timed sweep of the area now that Gordon has arrived. Eli warns Alex and Gordon, as we're trapped in the elevator, to flee to the coast instead, but not to go through What was that, Eli? Where were we not supposed to go? As we rush with Alex through the complex to rescue her father, Eli, we are separated from her and left with no path forward but to go. Wait, where was it again that we weren't supposed to go? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been several hours of these Half-Life retrospectives, and we're finally here at what I and many other Half-Life aficionados believe to be the peak of the series. Ravenholme is the bee's knees, totally wicked, the 10 out of 10 banger, the skibbity-doo-bop, whatever your generation's slang is for awesome. Ravenholme feels like a culmination of all the ideas that were lurking in Half-Life 1's horror elements, finally refined and turned up to 10. The level design was intended as exactly that, with the designers of the game knowing that Half-Life 2 had a much lighter tone despite its dark dystopian future, and they wanted a section of the game that would appeal to that original sense of horror that Half-Life 1 fans had enjoyed. And boy, did we get that. Everybody at Valve is just at peak performance when it comes to this level. Freeman emerges from the underground tunnels, and the first thing we see is an abandoned, seemingly empty Eastern European town in the dimming light of the evening. And cue in that soundtrack. Half a corpse hangs ominously from a tree, and the titular ravens craw and fly away at seeing Gordon. The fundamental design idea behind Ravenholme is simple. The player just got the gravity gun, which has endless ammunition. So the player is given a level with incredibly sparse ammo and a massive amount of enemies, and will need to use the gravity gun to take them down using the environment. To further this conceit, the designers came up with the character of Gregory, a crazy priest who is determined to see the citizens of the town set right with God, and by setting right, he means put back 6 feet under where they belong. The town is littered with Father Gregory's traps, all of which serve as fun toys for the player to exploit. These include spinning rotor blades, cars you can drop down on the zombies, and of course, a lot of fire and electricity. Sometimes these traps are also as much of a hurdle for Gordon as an aid. The interactivity between the gravity gun and the environment is so darn fun, it might be a war crime. To move forward through the first section, we need to move the furniture and some nicely placed saw blades. These blades are by far the best weapon in this section, or at least according to me, as a well-placed blade can decap a load of zombies in a single shot. But almost everything can be used as a weapon to some degree. Just don't expect to be doing much damage flinging paper at an incoming zombie horde. The level starts off rather easily. A few narrow corridors in contrast to earlier areas, as we make our way up to and through the central square with a power station, where we're introduced to Half-Life 2's best character, Father Gregory. He has the official theologically correct interpretation of Pauline Christianity, by which a good Christian will do anything he can to keep his fellow believers 6 feet under the ground and not walking around with an unfriendly xenomorph attached to their nervous system. We turn off the flame in front of the power station and head inside. Inside, we're introduced to everybody's worst nightmare, the superpowered evil black head crab. These guys can temporarily poison you, dropping your health to 1, which is super fun. Thankfully, they don't come with any associated zombies. I'd hate to see what these guys would do if they had any control over their entire body. Eventually, we make our way to the roof, where we once again meet up with Father Gregory, who congratulates us on getting this far. The next section introduces us to the level's car traps. Gregory, as I said, has rigged cars on pulleys to drop down on the zombies. And in fact, we need to stand on one of these cars as it goes back up in order to progress on through the level. Took me a little while to figure out that. Now, so far, Ravenholme is, in my humble opinion, the easiest level in the game so far. Carrying around a simple saw blade will be enough to trivialize everything, even for someone rather new to the first-person shooter genre. But that, my friends, is about to change. Having scaled our way up the car, we make our way across the rooftops and finally meet Gregory and get properly introduced. He helps us out with some fire support and invites us to go and meet him at his church across town. Now we're essentially done with the level's tutorial and things are about to get real. And I mean, they're coming for you, Clarice, real very quickly. In the following sections of the level, we witness the ground zero area of what happened to Ravenholme. Combine missiles are struck in the streets. Clearly, this new strain of black headcrab was tested on Ravenholme. Continuing on through more narrow corridors now slammed full of zombies and streets swarming with headcrabs, we make our way up a ladder and through an apartment complex that gives us the opportunity for some absolutely lovely multi-kills on these zombies. We finally arrive at the top of the complex and once again meet up with Father Gregory. He approves of our slaughter of the zombies, but tells us we've stirred up hell and hands us a shotgun. A shotgun we are about to need. And we're finally, at this point, introduced to something that should have been lurking in the heads of any Half-Life player this whole level. If we just encountered the new super headcrab strain, where on earth are these super zombies with this headcrab attached to them? Well, we're about to find out. The next sequence in which we fight off these new super fast zombies is one of the best in the game. If we pay attention to the drain pipes on the roof upon which we defend ourselves, we can blast them as they climb up, given the sound and motion, which gives the level a lovely tower defense kind of feel, but also is, super creepy because you can literally feel them in your headphones coming up behind you. You can also see the beginning of the kind of ideas that would eventually crystallize into the epic that was Left 4 Dead. As it feels as if the black headcrab zombies are trying to coordinate an attack on you from every direction, working as a hive mind against the player. A pretty good idea that Valve would definitely explore more. Big shoutouts also need to go to the sound designers on this level. Not only is Kelly Bailey's soundtrack for these sections amazing as usual, but the movement and sound design of these new enemies and the rattling of the drain pipes provide excellent atmosphere, but it's also important player feedback. If you lose track of these guys, you can get overwhelmed pretty darn quickly. The next sections are reasonably more difficult than what's come before. Sadly, I don't have all the footage I would want of this section of the game because of something that I've complained about throughout my Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 retrospective, and that is save state corruption. There is just a lot of save state corruption in this game. I don't remember it happening at launch, but it definitely happens if you play the game now. If you're going to play through Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2 after rewatching this retrospective because of the nostalgia, save the game a lot because it just seems to be corrupting a lot. I've played it on multiple PCs throughout this, and the issue persists regardless. Just saying, watch out. What follows is a tense section in which we need to flip a switch in a wide area to move on. We're also introduced to the zombie that carries massive amounts of black headcrabs on its back and will fling them at you from large distances. Eventually, we end up making our way closer to the church for a final standoff. Gregory sends out a cart to meet us, and on the other side of the ravine stands the church. But man, this cart is slow moving, and so we've got to hold off waves of fast zombies until we can eventually make it across. But the fun doesn't stop there. Now, as we arrive on the other side, we've got a companion in our zombie slaying, as Gregory wants to help us on through the churchyard to a tunnel that leads to the coast. How it is exactly that Gregory knows we need to get to the Gold Coast because Gordon doesn't speak, I'll just leave up to you to figure out. An absolutely satisfying ending to the level though, as we mow down waves of zombies with Gregory saying random crazy things over the sound of the melee. With the zombies mostly dispatched, we leave Father Gregory to his Bible study and head off through a headcrab-infested series of caverns. And now we emerge into one of the few sections of the game I genuinely have mixed feelings about. This section introduces a new enemy that will crop up quite a bit from now on, the Sniper. The sniper is always hidden in windows around the game, and they need to be blown out of their positions by high explosives. This often requires manipulating the environment to get close enough to them, as the range on their grenades is limited. But I often find that this interaction can be a bit unsatisfying sometimes, as it's very difficult to dodge them accurately, and being super Counter-Strike pro level accurate with your grenades is a little bit frustrating. Anyways, that's just how I feel. Once we make it past the snipers, we find a bunch of resistance members in a warehouse having a shootout with them. After finishing off the Combine, they show us to the back of their base, where we're put back in contact with Alex. She informs us that Eli Vance and Judith Mossman have been taken to Nova Prospekt. They were captured in that suspiciously timed sweep of Black Mesa East. We're now supposed to make our way along the coast of Country 17 to get to the prison. To avoid the antlions, we're going to be given our own set of wheels. The buggy has the Tau cannon equipped to it, and it is the quintessential vehicle of Half-Life 2 and probably of Gary's mod as well. Unlike the swamp boat in Waterhazard that I mentioned handled in a very noob-friendly, accident-adverse way, this isn't true at all here. This thing can flip and get stuck on almost anything, and the use of the gravity gun will be required when that happens. We're taught this fact, in fact, immediately by the developers as the car is dropped down onto the sand with us being flipped over. Goddamn Resistance members just can't do anything right without Gordon doing it. We also learn in this section what happens when you stand on the sand. As I've said it many times during these Half-Life retrospectives, Valve tend to focus their level design around one fun idea per level. And the fun idea for the next few levels? The floor is lava. We all played it as kids. And so in the initial section of this level, we're going to avoid the lava floor by going vroom 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 over it. The initial section of our drive is a short jaunt along the coastline, fighting off Combine here and there. Eventually, we reach the end of the beach as the hills loom ahead of us, and we need to turn into a small town nearby. We're led down into their HQ, and we meet super spiffing British commander type who introduces us to our new friend, the rocket launcher, which we'll need because one of the game's first boss fights is coming. Now, we're going to use the rocket launcher as our main way of killing the game's hardest enemies, much like we did in the final level of Half-Life 1. Namely, the choppers and striders who will appear in later levels and serve as the game's primary antagonists in many ways. I made the mistake throughout this playthrough of Half-Life 1, which you'll see in the footage, of forgetting how much improved the rocket launcher is over what it was and what it could do in Half-Life 1. This is important because a lot of the combat with the rocket launcher involves using its unique ability to weave around enemy fire and projectiles and assorted obstacles. And as you can probably see from the footage here, I was very, very bad at that at the start here. You literally need to aim away from the chopper and let the rocket pass by it and then loop the rocket back around to hit it. I'd completely forgotten that you could do this with such a wide arc. It's actually a super fun mechanic once you get it down, but it can feel a bit overused by the end of the game because we're going to be killing a lot of choppers. With the chopper dispatched, Gordon is done being a hero to all these Resistance members, and we can once again head down Highway 17. The next era we enter is super fun because we get to play with heavy machinery. To progress through this section, we need to fight our way up and use the crane to carry the vehicle from one side of the platform to the other, fighting off Combine as we do. Smashing them with container crates held by the crane is super duper fun and never gets old. This should have been a mini game in and of itself. The rest of the level progresses similar to that of Waterhazard. We drive forward, eventually reach some obstacle we need to move past. The first of these is a Combine barrier set up covering the road. This can be unpowered by using our gravity gun to smack the Combine's vehicle, whose batteries are powering it. As we continue, we run into another one of these barriers. You might initially think this can be resolved quickly like the last one, but you'd be wrong. The switch to turn off the barrier covering the rail bridge is on the other side of the rail bridge, and Gordon must make his way on the underside of the bridge all the way over to the control tower opposite. The initial journey is suspiciously easy and everything is eerily quiet, but once we make our way inside and drop the barrier, absolute bedlam breaks loose, and we need to fight yet another chopper as we make our way back across the bridge. At this point, our chopper kill count is 2, but keep that number in mind for the moment. The section where you cross the bridge is so darn epic, and as I said in my Half-Life 1 retrospective, Valve also loved to play with our sensation of vertigo, and jumping across the massive bridge really gives me that feeling in the pit of my stomach. And dealing with the chopper as it stalks you firing between the beams is just a great vibe. Also, given the fact that you've already passed through this area, it also means you've already memorized where the ammo is and all the good places to find it, because it would be super annoying if we suddenly had to fight a bunch of enemies with the rocket launcher, but we're totally unsure where the ammo was. Wouldn't it? As we make our way across the train bridge, we find out why you don't do illegal crossings of train tracks with your vehicle when we narrowly dodge being totally splattered on the way across. But just when you think the worst is over, we find ourselves in that scene we've seen in every zombie movie, driving through a tunnel blocked by traffic and surrounded by the recently deceased. But don't worry, with a trusty tire as our weapon, we're good. The gameplay loop then repeats once more, but now we've got to go on a scavenger hunt for a missing battery to open the gate forward, where we reach the end of the level and arrive at a resistance outpost. They put our car away to hide it from the Combine, which is just the game's excuse to take it away from us for the next section, because I'm pretty sure the Combine know where we are, as you'll see. We must now fight off several waves of enemies and yet another chopper. This is one of the first fights where it can really feel like you're collaborating as a team with the Resistance members, and the Resistance members here aren't that annoying or that stupid, because the space is wide open and they're not getting crammed into little corners. We're now on 3 choppers down, and killing choppers is still sort of fun. With the Combine defeated, we're off down a secret passageway under the lighthouse to the next level, SandTraps. This level I absolutely hated when I first played Half-Life 2. In fact, it was the only level that I think I didn't like, but I've got to say upon replaying it as an old man, this has changed my mind completely. As I already mentioned, Valve are playing off the idea of the floor being lava. In the previous mission, we need to drive fast to avoid any areas of open sand, but now without the car, we need to rely on other means. This level opens with a great example of what happens when you do step on the floor, in the example of these 2 wounded guys. And this means that for a good section of the level, we're going to be literally playing that game we all used to play as kids where you can't touch the floor. And there's just something that works so well about this that I really love, especially when you add in the gravity gun allowing you to move objects around. There's not much more to these early sections of the level other than playing this little minigame. We move along the sandy beach, touching as little sand as possible. A single touch will spawn 1 antlion, a longer touch will spawn 4, and then they'll tick in session from then on until you're overwhelmed by antlions. At the end of this section, we get what is probably actually one of the better boss-ish encounters in the game with the Antlion Guard. With him defeated, a Vortigaunt emerges from a nearby door and is going to extract his scent pods. They're very round, that's all I'm saying, and the process he admits is not very hygienic. With us now holding the Antlion's sack in our hands, we're now able to control our very own swarm of antlions in the levels to come. And oh good lord are we going to need them, because the game's difficulty is about to dramatically spike upwards. As I've mentioned thus far, besides a few sections in Ravenholme, Half-Life 2 on normal difficulty is a reasonably easy first-person shooter. Even for the time, it was pretty easy to play. But from now on, things are going to get a little bit more difficult as we progress. The next section involves a beach approach that oddly reminds me a little bit of the D-Day Beach Assault level in the Medal of Honor series. We've got to move past Combine gun emplacements on our way towards Nova Prospekt on the opposite end of the beach. We can flank them using our army of antlions both as a distraction and as a support. The antlion sack allows us to either throw it at an enemy position and send our antlions forward to attack, or we can right-click, which will summon the antlions back to ourselves. In fact, for some strange reason, the antlions are much more helpful and intelligent than the NPC resistance fighters that we'll work with in the final section of the game, and I'll complain about them when the time comes. The gameplay though here on screen should speak for itself, and it's incredibly satisfying, right up until the point we get to the front of the prison complex itself that looms up above us and things jump up even another notch in difficulty. At this point, we get to fight 2 choppers at once. And while our army of angry antlions are useful, they can't literally jump into the sky and fight the choppers for us. The atmosphere throughout this section, though, is amazing. As you make your way forward, the lights dimming as the evening sets over the coastline, and with that final explosion of your foes, a crack emerges in the side of Nova Prospekt, allowing us to climb inside the prison's fortifications along with our army of antlion buddies. This leads us to the next level, Nova Prospekt. Our invasion of Nova Prospekt is divided into two sections, the Antlion section as I'll call it, and the Alex plus Turret section. It's safe to say that the entirety of Half-Life 2 has Eastern European vibes, but no place are they put to better use, in my opinion, than in the early section of Nova Prospekt. Bleak prison levels can feel kind of samey, but this doesn't happen here. Immediately upon entering the place, you can feel that this is some creepy-ass former Soviet-style prison, now almost entirely empty. This gives the area a super creepy liminal space vibe. A prison without prisoners is like an empty mall or your school at night when no one else is there. It just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Add in a bit of Eastern European flair and abandoned objects strewn about the place, and everything just hits right on. We need to make our way through a series of narrow corridors using our army of antlions on the hapless Combine. Our little buddies aren't so good about turrets, so we'll need to use well-placed grenades to take them down so that our horde of lion boys can proceed onwards. Turrets are another one of Valve's fun ideas. However, at times I question whether turrets are in fact fun at all. Turrets are basically the same as in Half-Life 1, only much more deadly. The advantage or disadvantage here, depending on what side of the turret you're on, is that the game's physics engine now allows you to knock the turrets over rather than simply destroy them. All well and good, you might think, but the placement is often much trickier than in Half-Life 2, and the physics system means that a well-placed grenade that often should knock them over often doesn't quite knock them over, leaving you confused as to how to proceed. Some turrets also emerge from the cover of the ground itself in later levels, and that can get really annoying to finally pop a nade down there and destroy them. Overall, turrets can sometimes be a questionable idea when it comes to things being fun. After progressing through the prison for a while, we're forced to jump down into what is presumably a dining hall for the prisoners, only to witness some Combine soldiers having an issue with another antlion guard. As I've said before, all the Half-Life games make use of pre-scripted sequences to add atmosphere, but this one has to be one of my absolute favorites. We now make our way through the broken side of the old Soviet prison into the side of the prison structure proper, which is literally being devoured and consumed step by step by the Combine. The imagery here as we exit out is excellent. You might have thought that this prison, the Soviet-style one that we've been roaming around with the antlions in, is Nova Prospekt proper, but the truth is that the Combine are assimilating this place for their own needs. There's a wonderful surreal feeling as we're in and out between the old building and the large Combine structure that is literally consuming it. Once again, a tribute to Antonov's absolutely excellent artistic design. As we turn the corner, we see Alex standing at a console as a train passes by with the sound of gunfire. Now, interesting note here, this is where Gordon probably would have ended up had his train not been redirected. He would have ended up here at Nova Prospekt. Now we're reunited with Alex, we're going to make our way through the rest of the complex to find her father. She manages to pull Eli Vance out of one of his stasis pods by using the computer. She then sends him on through the complex using that system to the transportation room where she hopes will escape. And it is here, though, I will begin my one criticism of Half-Life. Yes, despite my high praise for this being one of the greatest gaming titles of all time, and still in 2025 one of the best games of all time, to play now, not for nostalgia, this game does suffer from one thing that was common in 2000s gameplay: bad NPC missions. Now, most NPCs in Half-Life 2 can die, and it doesn't generally affect things other than make it minorly inconvenient. Not so for Alex in this section. Now, she's not that stupid. If you play aggressively enough, she shouldn't die. But God, the overall quality of the game really drops due to these NPC companions. Give me antlions over these humans any day. Thankfully, this section is over quickly, and we're on to the next section where Alex leaves us to do some hacker things. But she leaves us with the ability now to use Combine turrets against them. We can pick them up and place them as we want, though they only fire if standing upright, meaning the Combine can take out our turrets using the exact same tactics that we used against theirs. This leads to an initial standoff that I totally cheese by placing turrets in places the Combine find hard to reach and then hiding in a corner. In fact, I do this in many sections here. It reminds me of playing hide and seek as a child, only with turrets and a dystopian alien government. Once the standoff is over, Alex drops back down through a vent and uses the nearby console. And would you believe it? It turns out Judith Mossman has been working with the Combine and Brain the whole time. Good God, I never saw this coming the first time I played Half-Life. After being separated and reunited with Alex a whole other time and one more turret section that I also cheesed, we now escort Alex safely towards the teleporter with Eli waiting for us. Judith is there and her and Alex have some words. With Mossman in tow, we now attempt to escape with Vance and Mossman. This turns out predictably as you'd expect. Another standoff against waves of Combine troops with our strategic placement of turrets. Sadly, there's no corner for me to hide in and cheese the fight this time. Equally predictably, Judith betrays us, wouldn't you know it, and uses the teleporter to escape with Eli Vance, and leaves us and Alex to die at the hands of the Combine troops. Alex, however, manages to repower the teleporter, and we dive inside just as the room is completely swarmed by troops. And with that, we're back where we started the game, in Kleiner's lab. A confused Kleiner opens the door with a shotgun and explains to us that we've been missing for a week. Our attack on Nova Prospekt has been taken as a signal to begin the revolution, and the streets of City 17 have gone full "Do you hear the people sing?", albeit with machine guns and rocket launchers. The next two levels will see us fight alongside the citizens of City 17 against the forces of the Combine, and oh boy, I hate the citizens of City 17 sometimes. While I feel like the antlions were super useful, the NPCs are almost always a hindrance. Particularly in the upcoming sections, where there's a lot of times where you'll turn a corner and realize you need to go back and take cover due to heavy gunfire coming from that direction, but to find that this is now impossible because a squad of 4 people is standing behind you saying, "We've got you, Gordon. Don't you worry, Gordon. I'll heal you, Gordon." Goddamn sycophants. But my complaints aside, Anticitizen 1 has one hell of an epic intro here. A car is blocking our way as Dog shows up and decides to do a little bit of clearing the way for us as the attack launches. The animations in this section, particularly Dog's, are super impressive for the time, and looking back on it, I really couldn't demand more from even a modern game. Shows you how much talent the animators at Valve had. What follows is much like the opening level of the game, albeit this time we've got friends. The fun idea for this level is Valve's proximity mine. You can pick it up from the ground with the gravity gun. We need to clear the minefields for our troops to move forward, and we can either replace the mines now under our control or just throw them away with the gravity gun using them as a projectile. What follows is a series of brutal street battles as you move through the streets, backyards, and the houses of City 17. Eventually, after prolonged fighting, we're reunited with Alex. In order to open the gate so that the resistance can progress forward, we end up having another standoff against the Combine, holding a square while Alex unlocks the gate. However, once the gate is open, it appears the bridge has long since been destroyed by the slow-moving outreach of the Citadel's destructive arms. As a result, Alex climbs up on a nearby roof to try to find a way forward, only to be jumped by the Combine out of our sight and presumably captured. As Gordon, we've now got to move through a series of tunnels and then work our way to the top of a warehouse and eventually manage to end up on the other side of where that bridge would have led us. As we go down the stairs, we're informed by one of the Resistance members that Barney has been pinned down under sniper fire. Yes, Barney from Black Mesa is going full Rambo and is pinned down by sniper fire. Can we take a moment to respect that Barney has gone from lazy security guard to Resistance member? There's just something adorable about the way Valve tried to develop the characters in Half-Life 2 from Half-Life 1. We once again fight our way through the streets and up to the top of a half-constructed building in which Barney is pinned down. You'll need some decent accuracy with your nades to clear out the snipers, a feature that I think a lot of modern games wouldn't add at the risk of frustrating players, but it does feel satisfying, as I've mentioned before, when you finally blow these sneaky snipers out of their hiding place. With Barney freed, we're ready to approach the Overwatch Nexus to open the gate forward for the Resistance and remove the rather ominously named suppression device. We enter into the courtyard and discover very quickly that at least one of the things the suppression device does is that it creates a big evil space laser that blasts the ground if we stand too long in the same place. Get your quick save button ready and hope that it doesn't get corrupted in the process, because you very well may get blasted as much as I did here. I want to complain though for 1 second about an aspect of this level, and that's this little door here. This door you need to find to move forward is not at all obvious. Now, I get that most games at the time didn't hold your hand the way modern games do, and I like that. But the thing is, Half-Life 2 is generally so well designed that it's often very clear, if you're paying attention to your environment, where you need to go to progress. However, just look at this door. How is that the way forward? Anyways, once through the door, the Combine so happily left open for us, we fight our way into the building. We need to take on waves of enemies as we work to disable 3 generators in the central area. Eventually, we make our way out and onto the roof and confront yet more choppers. And with the suppression device now disabled, the Resistance fighters swarm into the courtyard for an epic anti-Strider battle. Striders, for the most part, are the same as choppers, only they walk instead of fly. They fire much more accurately, and they take an absolutely insane amount of hits to kill. This section that follows is the only section of the game I will actually argue sucks. Now you see the Resistance members, they tell you they've got plenty of rocket ammunition on the map. They are correct, there is some way over on the other side as we exit the building here, but it's really on the opposite side. But it's okay, we've got literally an army of people here with rocket launchers to take down the Striders and distract them while we make our way to the opposite side, right? No, they're all going to die immediately and just wander around getting damaged pointlessly as we try and make our way to the other side. And in the end, they're going to contribute nothing, as Gordon Freeman, or us, is going to have to take down every last darn Strider ourselves as we collect the ammunition they failed to fire off their corpses. That is what happens, and it's not super duper fun. It takes what should have been an epic battle and makes it feel more like a chore. These guys, the Striders, take too many shots to take down, and with no Resistance members to distract them, you need to duck and cover like crazy in order to survive these fights. Eventually, with the Striders defeated, the gate to the south opens and we can progress forward. But as we do, guess what? More Striders chasing us, so we dive into this derelict building, rearm, and proceed to take them down too, along with yet more Combine troops. I have a feeling that some of the troops in the former area were actually supposed to survive and come with us into this next area, which would have made this bit a lot more fun, but they were very, very dead by that point. But just as I'm losing hope, this enterprising chap here shows up and cheers me on, and we get a new infusion of troops to back us up. And as we do, we're told that we need to make our way to higher ground to finally confront the Striders that are beating back the Resistance members. This following fight is in many ways the final boss of the game. If you're looking for something like Nalanth, you're not going to get it. There's a hole in the wall with an invisible wall blocking our way forward, so all we can do here is sit with the Resistance members, reload up on our rocket ammo infinitely, and proceed to take down each one of the Striders. I feel like Valve really wanted to channel some of the vibes of Call of Duty and Medal of Honor, as those had been two of the big successful first-person shooter games between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. But in the end, these squad-based levels are actually some of the weaker ones in Half-Life 2, at least in my opinion. I say this because I know that some of you in the comments are going to tell me that Follow Freeman is one of the best levels in the game, or any game ever. And it definitely has its share of the fan base. I just don't get it. I guess I'm a sad goth horror boy, and I think Half-Life is much stronger when it's doing Ravenholme than when it's doing the whole cinematic squad shooter thing. Still, if this were any level in any other first-person shooter, it would probably still be the best level in that game. This is a gaming masterpiece, no question. When we finally killed each and every last Strider, we can progress onwards. On the street below, we're reunited with Barney and Dog. Dog uses his mighty strength to tear open a hole in the ground floor of the Citadel, and off we can go inside. This level is actually second to Ravenholme for being one of my favorite levels, because it does something I love in gaming so much, something that I feel gets done better by Japanese developers than Western ones, particularly in the modern era. The good old change of scenery. Games like Dark Souls, Final Fantasy in its prime, and the Persona series are all masters of the change of scenery, whether it's exploring a new town, different music, or a new color palette. Radical shifts in tone between locations really add a lot of narrative depth for me. The visuals a lot of times can convey the story better than lore or dialogue. Western games in this area tend to be more consistent in tone, to the point that by 2006, almost every game would grow to have the same PlayStation 3 gray overtones. Don't get me wrong, I've got a lot of nostalgia for the edgy, grim era of gaming as well, but Valve aren't doing anything like that here. The sudden shift in tone once we enter the Benefactory is similar to the change when we entered Zen in the end of Half-Life 1. We're in a different world now. As slowly we go forward into the heart of darkness, this looming feeling that what's ahead can't possibly be confronted the way Gordon has confronted those simple enemies before. And to match up to that feeling of alienation, Valve had a clever idea. As we progress through the level, suddenly all of our items are sucked off us by a magnet, save our HEV suit and gravity gun, both of which will be super powered and allow us to fight off endless hordes of Combine. This level really makes you ask yourself, what if we made a version of Half-Life that was slimmed down and just involved solving puzzles and using a futuristic gravity gun? And the answer to that would be the Portal series. The only real mechanic in these sections are the balls inside of the teleportation fields, which we were briefly introduced to back in Follow Freeman when we had to remove them to power off those force fields I mentioned. Our only range projectile through these sections are the said balls, which we can chuck at the Combine. Other than that, every shot with our gravity gun is an instant kill on any Combine soldier that gets close enough to be hit by it. Another of my favorite aspects of this level is how pared down the environments themselves are. While many levels in Half-Life 2 can feel a bit cluttered by the amount of items on screen and the lifelike level design elements, these levels are absolutely austere. Obviously, on the narrative level, this makes the Citadel feel apart, like an alien intruder in the world. But it also has a nice gameplay side effect, in that these levels are much more readable to the player. It's a feature that would be reprised very successfully in the Portal games. It makes seeing what you need to do and what gameplay aspect Valve are throwing at you much clearer to the player and much more easy to engage with. Also, I think the Source engine just looks good when it's doing these empty liminal spaces. Eventually, we find another pod, climb inside, and we're taken up. Once we reach the top of the Citadel, we're greeted with Dark Energy, the game's final level. We're greeted by Judith, who explains to us that there's nothing we can do, which to an extent is true as we sit there silently looking at her. We're now united with Breen, Alex, Eli, Vance, and of course Judith. Breen tries to blackmail Gordon by threatening to send Alex and Eli Vance through a Combine portal, suggesting that he take over the Resistance and call off the revolt. Judith has finally had enough at this point and grabs the Doctor Who sonic screwdriver and sets Gordon free. Breen responds by fleeing the scene with our new and improved portal gun? Gravity gun. It's a gravity gun. We chase after Breen and get a view of who the Combine actually are on the TV screen above him, as he's pleading for them to get him off Earth but claims that he can't possibly survive in the environment of the planet they'd send him to. But upon seeing Gordon and Alex after him, he drops the gravity gun, or maybe it's the Tau cannon at this point. With Breen fleeing to God knows where and rearmed with the Tau gun, Alex sends Gordon up the elevator to the top of the Citadel to destroy it. An epic gauntlet follows, with us trying to destroy the core by removing its external protections. But before that, we need to fight some choppers. Yes, choppers are the final boss. Where is our kill count now? I don't know, but it's in the double digits. This is a bit of a disappointing final boss fight to an otherwise amazing ending. But I will say that hitting the choppers and watching them be almost instantly blasted out of the sky, given they were so difficult before, feels super good. As we claim our victory and ponder whether there's time for Gordon and Alex to escape, we get an answer to that question.
Gordon, we've got to get out of here. Maybe we still have...
Time, Dr. Freeman? Is it really that time again? It seems as if you only just arrived. You've done a great deal in a small time span. You've done so well, in fact, that I've received some interesting offers for your services. Ordinarily, I wouldn't contemplate them, but these are extraordinary times. Rather than offer you the illusion of free choice, I will take the liberty of choosing for you, if and when your time comes round again. I do apologize for what must seem to you an arbitrary imposition, Dr. Freeman. I trust it will all make sense to you in the course of... well, I'm really not at liberty to say. In the meantime, this is where I get off.
Half-Life 2 is possibly one of the most important titles in the history of modern gaming, and I really enjoyed replaying it for this video. If by some miracle you are still watching this far in, do give me a like and subscribe. In the end, I think there's little to criticize about the game even now. Sure, its NPCs can be annoying. The story beats can seem contrived just to drive you forward at times. But there's nothing in the past 20 years of gaming that has really topped what Half-Life 2 did, and most modern titles still live up to many of its standards. If Half-Life 2 RTX were to be released today as a standalone title, it would still be a 10 out of 10 title today. The only thing that dates Half-Life 2 at all is its graphics, not its gameplay. Half-Life 2 is just so darn good. It sets standards for things like physics, narrative storytelling, and overall design that were so important they basically became standards, particularly in the FPS genre and the type of games that would directly follow its legacy. We would never have had BioShock, Dishonored, or the Metro series without what Half-Life 2 did, and also what it taught its developers. And on a broader level, it also set the vibe for what PC gaming could become and elevated to be. It set the stage for an era in PC gaming where, frankly, consoles just weren't competing as well with the standards that were set by titles like Half-Life 2, Counter-Strike, and Team Fortress. And along with the launch of Steam, Half-Life 2 began an era in PC gaming of which today we're still the inheritors. And with that, I'll see you guys when we come to episode 1 and 2.